this is a really great crowd. I want to thank all of you for coming today. I especially want to thank Diane and all the wonderful people who, when I came here, were outside busy setting things up. I know, you've got a dedicated crew helping you out, and it's just wonderful. So anyway, and thank you for sharing your stories. When Diane passed the mic around, it's always interesting to hear about everyone's backgrounds and their reasons for coming here. So what I'm going to do today is talk about my background. You probably know a little bit about it because you saw the flyer and Diane's emails. I'm going to tell you about my background. I'm going to tell you about how I came to write this book. And I'm going to talk about near-death experience and especially near-death experience after effects. And I want to leave some time for questions, and I'm interested in hearing from all of you as well. So let me just start off by asking, how many of you have had an extraordinary experience for which there's no explanation? And I feel like a lot of you are going to say, right. So, I gave a talk, thank you, I gave a talk in DC a few months back to a group of politicians and lobbyists, with their blue suits and their red ties and everything. And I was a little concerned about how this was going to go over with this particular group. But I started off by asking that question because I thought, if nobody raised their hand, I'd have to talk about something else. So, I asked that question, and, about 50% of the people raised their hand. So, the bottom line is many people have extraordinary experiences. Most people never talk about them. They don't ever talk about them because they don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want their family or friends to think they're crazy, so they keep it to themselves. So, but they're really quite a bit more common than I think some of us are led to believe. As a matter of fact, about a month ago, I still read the Wall Street Journal, so about a month ago there was a story, it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, about spiritually transformative experiences and how many people have them. I thought it was a little strange, it was in the Wall Street Journal, but it was interesting. And there was actually a study back in 2002 about the percentage of people who have these experiences. So anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about, but I just wanted to share that with you. So let me tell you a little bit about my background. I'm a psychic medium. I do chakra clearing and healing. I do some other healing work. But my background, my professional background, is actually in the investment business. So I don't know if there is a typical psychic, medium out there, but I'm pretty sure if there is, it wouldn't be me. So I come from a background in the investment business. I trained for that. I have an MBA in finance. I was a commentator on CNBC. I was a money manager. I was a professor at Johns Hopkins University teaching portfolio management and investments. So that was my chosen profession. That's what I did for many years. But the thing is, when I was in the investment business, I always knew things. Okay? I knew things, but I didn't know how I knew these things. But in the investment business, and I know some of you are in that business, particularly years ago, we always had a lot of reading to do, and they would come and they would bring the stacks of research reports, some of you know what I'm talking about, and plunk them down on my desk, and there'd always be a big stack. And, I could pick up an annual report or a prospectus, and I would know everything about the company, and I would know about the management, I would know about the product, I would know about the industry. And my job then was to go out and meet with the managements of these companies. And I always wondered, why do I have to do that? I mean, I already know, but I had to go, and I didn't know how I knew, and so that was my job. I went out and I would interview them. But I always knew, which ones were going to be good, and I didn't think about it too much because at that point, I had a very busy life. I had 3 children and a husband and, more than full-time job and, a million balls up in the air. So I didn't really get to philosophize about it too much. My boss used to say to me, Debra, you have good instincts. And I thought, okay, I guess that's what it is. I guess it's just good instincts. So that was, how I operated for many years. Now, in 2008, I decided to take an intuition development class in New York because, you know, I had pretty good intuition, I thought, and I thought it would be fun to take a class to tune it up, you know, learn a few tips and tools to tune it up. So I signed up for this class. Now, I live in Baltimore. I don't live around here. I live in Baltimore. And I went up to New York. It was a weekend class, Saturday and Sunday. And there were about 25 people in the class, and, you know, they looked like you guys, you know, men and women. And Saturday morning, we started out by doing a few exercises. And I was getting everything in these exercises, and I really didn't understand how that was happening. But these were pretty low-key exercises, so I didn't stress about it too much. And we took a break, and when we came back from the break, the teacher said, now we're going to do a seance. And that was not anything I was interested in. That was not what I came for. You know, I rechecked my schedule. It said intuition development, you know, so I thought, well, you know, it's Saturday morning. This class goes through Sunday afternoon, and just do this, and, you know, we'll go on to the next exercise. So the teacher said, I'm going to put you in a meditative state. I'm putting everybody in a meditative state, and then I'll take you out of the meditation. And if you see anything, you let me know, and I'll tell you what to do. So I thought, well, that's fine. You know, I'm not going to see anything, so it doesn't pertain to me. So I meditated, and then she took us out of the meditation, and she said, does anyone see anything? And I looked around, and everyone was looking at each other, and I raised my hand, and she said, yes, Deborah, what do you see? And I said, I see about 50 people. So, right. So she said, well, if you see someone in the corner of the room, that means they probably go with someone sitting in that corner. So I said, okay, well, I do actually see someone in the corner, and he's Hispanic. She asked me to describe him. He was Hispanic. He had dark hair parted in the middle, big handlebar mustache, big white teeth. And as I described him, the woman sitting in that corner said, I know who that is. That's my fiance. He died last year. And she was sobbing. And that woman said to me, you know, during the break, if I show you pictures on my cell phone, would you be able to identify him? And I said, sure, because for those of you who see people, you see them just like you would see the person sitting next to you. I saw him. So during the break, she flipped through some pictures on her cell phone, and I said, there, that's him. And she said, yes, that's my fiance. Now, she had wanted to hear from him. She believed in all this, and she wanted to hear from him, but had not. So she was very grateful to me for making that connection. And she thanked me, and she hugged me, and, you know, she was very grateful. And now, I used to work on Wall Street. Okay. There aren't a lot of thank yous on Wall Street. There's nobody see them. So it wasn't lost on me that I had done something, you know, meaningful for someone. I had done something profound. I was still very shook up. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't understand. I was overwhelmed. But it did register that I had done something significant for someone. And so, you know, we continued through the rest of the weekend with more exercises, and there were a lot of unusual things that happened to me that weekend. And Sunday, I drove back to Baltimore. And on my way back, I called one of my sons. I have 3 sons, but one scores very high in logic tests. So I called him, and I told him what happened. And he didn't say a word, but when I was all done, he said, well, that makes sense. We're just energy, and the energy has to go somewhere. So I thought, yeah, he was like 18 at the time. I went, oh, okay. So, you know, that was very helpful because that gave me a context to explain this, you know, because I was just kind of spinning before that, you know, trying to understand what had happened. And this was sort of a pseudoscientific context, you know, when you put it in those terms, I could hang something on that. Now, I didn't talk about it. You know, I came back to Baltimore. I didn't tell anybody what happened because it's not the kind of thing you talk about. You know, like, what'd you do this weekend? I went to a movie. Oh, I saw dead people. So, you know, I didn't talk about it. And remember, most of the people I knew worked on Wall Street. So, you know, it's just not something, you just don't go there. So I didn't talk about it. Now, that summer, I decided to go out to Taos, New Mexico. Anybody here ever been to Taos? I'm sure some of you, right. So you know what it's like out there. There's a lot of artists and writers and psychics, musicians, and I had been there a number of times in the past, and I decided to go out there that summer to paint. I'm also an artist. So I went out there, I rented a place for 2 months to paint. And what happened was, a number of years later, I was still there. And that's a very common story in Taos. You know, when you talk to the locals and you say, how long have you been here? They say, oh, I came for a weekend about 20 years ago. So, you know, they say if the mountain loves you, you stay. Now, Taos at that time for me was the right place for me to be. I was, you know, guided there. And this is where I unpacked my experience and began to work with the energy to become a psychic, a professional psychic, and a medium. I took workshops. I eventually offered workshops, did readings out there and this sort of thing. Eventually I went to Arthur Findlay. Anybody here been to Arthur Findlay? It's a college of mediumship. I think you probably know college of mediumship in the UK. So I, you know, did the work out there, and, you know, it was completely natural, because in Taos, when somebody says, what do you do? And you say, I'm a psychic, they say, oh, me too. So it's not like Baltimore. So, yeah, so I stayed out there for a number of years, and eventually I decided it was time to come back home on the East Coast. And I decided, well, you know, I think that's going to be the end of this, because I'm coming back to Baltimore, and Baltimore is not at all like Taos, and I won't be doing any of this work. But that's not what happened. I came back, and shortly after I came back, a woman asked me to read for her, and she actually had had a near-death experience. She was 39 and had a cardiac arrest in a Hopkins hospital. She's in the literature. And she asked if I would read for her. And I said yes. And then her friend wanted me to read for her, and I did. And then the friend's mother wanted me to read, and then they wanted me to do a workshop. And one thing kind of led to another, and before you know it, you know, I was working as a psychic and a medium. Now, you're probably wondering, what does any of this have to do with her book? So I'm getting there. So I was asked to read for a well-known NDEer in Washington, D.C. And this person, when I read for him, I was getting some very unusual symbols. You know, psychics see things in symbols. Those of you who get messages, you know, you get them in symbols generally. So I was getting some very unusual symbols with this guy, and he had some unusual after effects. And when I came home to Baltimore that evening, I started thinking, what happened to him? Why does he have these after effects, and what's he supposed to do with them? And what about other NDEers? What do they get, if anything? And how do they get it? So I Googled NDE after effects, and what I found out was there was very little research done. So I said, well, I guess I'll have to do the research. Now, it's not that far-fetched, because, as I said, I was on Wall Street for many years. I started out as a healthcare research analyst. That was my job. So I researched very early stage companies and industries that weren't institutionalized, where there wasn't a lot of information. So I was used to doing this kind of work. So I decided that I would focus only on two types of after effects. I mean, there is some information out there, you know, some limited studies on near-death experience after effects, but they have, for the most part, pertain to psychological and social issues. You know, 65 to 75% of people get divorced, you know, because the spouse says, you know, honey, if you just stayed the way you were, we were fine. But they can't. So, you know, there's that. There's, you know, the fact that many people, you know, want to, you know, shift their jobs, they shift their friends, you know, they're looking for authenticity. So, you know, there have been some studies around the psychological and social issues, but I wasn't really interested. I was interested, but I wasn't going to write about that, because here's the thing. You know, there are many people who come back psychic. You know, I wanted to be able to say with some certainty, this is how you were before, and this is how you are afterwards. And with some of those psychological and social issues, you can't do that definitively. If somebody's psychic and they say to me, I used to be psychic, but I'm more psychic now, I have no way of measuring that. Or I used to be spiritual, I'm more spiritual now, I can't measure it. So I decided to focus on cognitive and physiologic after effects. And I know some of you are in medicine, so you'll know what I'm talking about. But the reason I focused on that was because it was definitive and it was irrefutable. So if any scientist wanted to say to me, that didn't happen, well, this person didn't have didn't have the skill before, or didn't have, this was their IQ before, and this is their IQ afterwards. So, these were things that had been measured. And so that's what I wanted to do. Remember, I come from a left brain background. Okay. So now I decided, to do this research, and I thought, I figured somebody wants me to do this, because I don't think there are a lot of us who used to be Wall Street research analysts who are now psychics. So I decided, I could combine my research background and the fact that I'm psychic. I could do readings for these people. I mean, I read for everybody, but I could do readings for the NDEers, and perhaps we could get at some of the things that happen to them for which there's no explanation. Now, they wanted the readings because they themselves often didn't have the answer to, a lot of these questions. I could give them a questionnaire. I could give them a questionnaire up and down, and they still wouldn't have the answer. Some of them would say to me, "How come I didn't go through a tunnel?" Well, we could put that on a questionnaire, but they couldn't answer. How come I didn't have a life review? Same thing. So they had questions themselves that couldn't be answered. They didn't know the answer. I certainly didn't know the answer, but we thought maybe in a reading we'd be able to, uncover some more information, and in fact we did. So that was very helpful. So let me talk to you a little bit about the kinds of cases, and some of the gifts and powers that these individuals came back with. So on the cognitive side, I looked at individuals who had newfound musical and mathematical abilities. There were people who never had picked up an instrument before, and then all of a sudden were, enthralled and compulsively creating music. There is a woman in the book who gets quantum physics downloads, and she has 32 bins of paper in her closet filled with these downloads. And she's a former hairdresser, so she's not at all yes. So there are people who come back with artistic capabilities. Bob Magrisso, who lives out here, actually he practices at this hospital, he's a physician, is also a wonderful shamanic artist, really wonderful artist. There's another individual in the book who was also a man of science, former geologist, who came back as a shamanic artist, and he said to me, "I don't do this. This isn't me." He just can't figure it out. So there are people who come back with those gifts, and then on the physiologic side, there are people who've returned with enhanced vision, enhanced hearing, higher IQ, spontaneous healing. Electrical sensitivity. Now, you don't have to have an NDE to be electrically sensitive, but many NDEers are. A variety of physiologic after effects. So I'll tell you a little bit about those, a few of the cases. But let me just say this. When I wrote this book, my intention was to drill down into the buckets of NDE after effects. And I thought, won't this be interesting? I'll be able to look, examine each of these after effects. And that happened, but it really turned into so much more than that. I was very rapidly taken into this whole field of consciousness. And that's what pervades all of this, in my opinion. And it was sort of like jumping into the deep end. It was more than the deep end. But, very interesting. But a lot of people who've read the book have said to me, I didn't have an NDE, but something happened to me. And they read the book, and it's like the woman back there who said, I had an NDE, and this has helped to put the pieces together. I hear that a lot. I didn't have an NDE, and this helps to put the pieces together, or they had one. But again, people don't talk about these experiences at all. So there aren't a lot of books written on the subject, of after effects from either spiritually transformative experiences or near-death experiences. So hopefully this will help people and get the conversation going, and perhaps some of you who are thinking about writing books and have an interest in the subject will pick up the ball and run with it, because there's, I think, still